Can you believe we're through all of the content that's in Unit 0? In this video, we're going to start our first example of Unit 1. Super exciting. In Unit 0, we try to introduce a lot of different topics, with really the goal being to make it to the point where we could do something interesting. And that something interesting was the breakout project. The idea being that whole unit was really kind of a pencil outline sketch. Like in art class, when you start out with a big project, let's say a painting that you're making, you make a pencil outline of what you're going to do first. What are the things we've talked about? We've talked about if statements, we've talked about variables, we've talked about loops, and all kinds of stuff in between. But you don't necessarily know all of that information in depth. The goal of Unit 1 is to start to really fill in some of those outlines with some more clear information. You're going to learn a whole lot more about if statements, a whole lot more about how math works in Java, and a whole lot more about strings. Let's start this way. We're actually going to make an entirely new project in BlueJ. So I'm going to go up here to Project, do New Project. Make sure you're saving it to the place where you want to. My SHP CSA folder is where I want to save it. And I'm going to call this project Randomness. And I'll click OK. And there's my blank project. Let's start this project by clicking the New Class button. We're going to make a console program, and we're going to call this one RandomNumbers. Let me open this up. Now, what do I mean by random numbers? Well, you're going to see this in just a second. Let's write this. Let's do while true. We know that this is a special type of loop called an infinite loop. This is just going to go forever. And let's do this. Double num equals math.random. You do have to do capital M math.random. And then let's just print line num. So what have I done? I've used this thing called math.random, which supposedly gives me back some double. Using math.random is how I get the idea of a random number in Java. Let's do one more quick thing in here. Let's add a pause 100. Otherwise, we're going to have numbers appearing so quickly I won't actually be able to tell what's going on. Oh, I can't spell pause. So let's figure out, we can see now math.random is the way I get a random number in Java, but the question is kind of a random number between what and what? Let's see. There we go. It looks like math.random gives me a random decimal. And if you let it keep scrolling, we can kind of get a sense of what's the lower bound that this number could be and what's the upper bound. I just saw one scroll that was actually like something times 10 to the negative fourth. So it looks like we can get pretty tiny. Math.random actually gives you a random number between, I'm going to do it like this, 0 and 1. And you can see based on the way that I typed the brackets and parentheses, could this random number be 0 at some point? Yeah, it could be, but could it be 1? It will never actually get exactly to 1. How does math.random work is that every time I call math.random, it gives me a different number within this range. And in this case, some double, again, between 0 and 1, so some decimal. And again, it will never actually give me the number 1. All right, let's close this up. And let's go ahead and add this. I'm going to do times 100. So this random number that was between 0 and 1, all I've done is I've multiplied this entire range by 100. So now I've changed this to a random number between 0 and 100. You can see, will I ever get the number 100? And the answer is no. So look, these are all random numbers that are between 0 and 100, not including 100. Now let's do something else. I'm going to close out of this again. Right now this is a double, but I don't like doubles. Let's do this instead. Let's say int num equals, remember if I say here math.random times 100, it's going to get mad at me because it knows that this actually is a double. and I can't say that a double is an int. But we learned a trick when we were doing this. Last week where I can actually force this to be an int by doing this. Now I've typecasted this entire expression to be an int. Now it is really important that I put the parentheses where I did. A typecast applies to whatever's directly to the right of it. So if I don't put the parentheses, what I'm typecasting is actually just Math.random. We know that Math.random is a number between 0 and 0.9999, which by default is a decimal. If I typecast anything that's less than 1 into an int, that's just going to be 0. So I put the parentheses to make sure I'm doing the multiplication before I actually do the typecast. Remember, this is that special thing that you can do. Typecasting just throws the decimal away. It's not rounding. So now this is a random number between what and what? This is actually between 0 and exactly 99. Why will I never get 100? Is because the biggest number in my range before was kind of 99.99999. And when I typecast that to an int, that becomes 99 flat. I completely get rid of the decimal. So if I compile this and I run it, there we go. We're going to get all of the numbers between 0 and 99, including 99. Now, at some point in your life, you've probably played the game, oh, I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 100. Can you guess what it is? Let's say I wanted to make this mathematically be between 1 and 100. What could I actually do? Well, all I need to do is add 1. If I add 1 to this range, doesn't it just shift the entire thing up? So that 0 and 99, I can add 1 to each. That's now 1 to 100, including 100. And there we go. We'll let this go and see if we actually do get a 100 at some point. Should be able to. There we go. There's my 100. So by using a little bit of math, we can use Math.random to generate a random number in any range. A random int in any range, a random double in any range. Let's try something a little different. Let's try to use what we've learned here to get a random 2-digit number. That's a number between 10 and 99, including 99. How do we think about this? How many possibilities are actually between 10 and 99? Well, if we start with just thinking about Math.random, that's between 0 and 0.9999. What am I going to want to multiply it here to get the right number of possibilities? Aren't there actually 90 numbers between 10 and 99, including both 10 and 99? Now, without this plus 1, this would get me a random number between 0 and 89. Don't I want to shift that entire range up by 10? And I think this will get you all of the random 2-digit numbers. So again, what can we use Math.random to do? Math.random can generate a random number between any two numbers. We can do it between negative numbers and positive numbers as well. It just depends on how we do the math around it.